It's December 18th, 1892, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Arion, Rebecca, and Olly, the Retrospectors.
What could be more Christmassy than a tale of a girl who befriends a Nutcracker doll that comes to life and wages a battle against an evil mouse king? Well, plenty of things, obviously, which is part of why when Tchaikovsky was first approached about writing a ballet on the subject, he said no. But after a certain amount of cajoling, he finally relented, and so alongside jolly fat men and candy canes and stockings and snowmen and sleigh bells, the annual celebration of Jesus' birth got a new bit of entirely off-topic iconography: mustachioed Germanic Prince Nutcracker dolls.
So, what happened today?
Oh, yeah.
It was the day that the Nutcracker opened at Mariinsky Theatre in St. Petersburg. But otherwise, it was a beautifully written introduction.
I thought, we could go fast and loose with this whole business now that we're approaching Christmas.
And Tchaikovsky did only really agree to it happening if it was part of a kind of double feature with Iolanta, which is incredible, isn't it? Because, I've never heard of Iolanta, have you?
It's a one-act opera, apparently. And I feel like if you're going to the opera now, you want money, you want bang for your buck. You don't want one act. Right. But I guess if you're already seeing a ballet first, you can probably deal with a slightly shorter opera as well.
But not just any ballet. You're seeing the Nutcracker first. It goes on forever. As Arion said, it's kind of got the whole kitchen sink chucked in it anyway in terms of set dressing.
Well, that was what Tchaikovsky didn't like about it, because really all of the story is in the first half, and then the second half is just fiddle-dee-diddle-dee-dee, we're in a land of candy canes, etc. He actually wrote to the director of the Mariinsky Theatre, who'd commissioned the piece in the first place, and he said that the premise is pretty infantile, and how am I going to create drama out of this? He wrote, "How the devil do you expect me to write music to express a kingdom of lollipops?" But to be fair, between the subject matter and also the choreographer was Marius Petipa, who had written, because I didn't know anything about how ballets are actually composed, but he had written explicit directions of exactly what each piece of music needed to convey, down to the exact tempo and timing. So if you're Tchaikovsky, you're not really getting a lot of space to express your genius.
Yeah, it's hilarious. You look at the notes that Petipa wrote, and they're things like, and this is literally what he wrote: "An empty stage, the moon lights up the dining room through the window." This phrase is actually underlined twice. 8 bars of mysterious and delicate music. Clara, in her nightdress, quickly returns to look at her darling Nutcracker once again. 8 bars. Still more mysterious music for her entrance. Something frightens her. 2 bars. So on it goes,
I like a brief. Suddenly Tchaikovsky doesn't seem like such a genius. I could write this.
I think Petipa was waiting for AI music. That's what he really wanted. He didn't want to work with Tchaikovsky. That sounds like he was quite difficult. He wanted to put in mysterious music.
Yeah. Well, the other reason that it was a brief that Tchaikovsky thought twice about was that he'd just come off the back of several poorly received ballets. He had done Swan Lake previously.
Rubbish!
Terrible. And then the same theatre owner, Ivan Vesevolozhsky, he approached Tchaikovsky for the first time to do Sleeping Beauty, another rubbish one, obviously. And both of these were really badly received by the critics. And so I think Tchaikovsky was just like, why would I be getting myself back into this whole mess? It's obvious that ballet and I don't agree with one another. And so it really was, apart from the whole business of him not being certain about this story setting, he was also like, I'm just not sure that I want to be involved in ballet, full stop.
But actually, Sleeping Beauty had been a hit with the audience, which is why there was a sold-out crowd on this day, because they loved the light-hearted kitsch fairy tale stuff, even if the critics didn't. Which again makes it kind of baffling as to why the Nutcracker was chosen as the story. I know it kind of makes sense now, but if you think of this as kind of proto-Disney, right? There are other fairy stories to plunder. Sleeping Beauty's been a hit. Do Cinderella.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But instead, they turned to this very obscure German short story from 1816. Now, in that version by E.T.A. Hoffmann, there's a 7-headed mouse king. There's a rodent mother avenging her children's death.
Again, very Christmas.
But the material they were looking at was the version from 1844, which makes more sense, which was a version by Alexander Dumas, which is the more familiar one, or it was then in Russia, and slightly more suitable for children, L'Histoire d'un casse-noisette. What I find extraordinary, as with our Little Orphan Annie episode, is that so soon after the original source material, it was okay for a novelist of that repute to just rip it off.
Yeah.
Did they not enforce intellectual property at all? Less than 30 years after the original, he's just like, yeah, I'll nick that. I'll do a version of that.
Copyright wasn't important then. The important thing was having a genteel version of the story.
Yeah.
If the original author didn't supply that, you could just rewrite it yourself. More lollipops, less seven-headed mouse kings.
You know what I'll do? I'll write a novel and I'll call it E.T. It's been 40 years since that. What's the worst that could happen?
Well, the other thing that happened surprisingly quickly was that Tchaikovsky wrote it very quickly. He wrote it in just a few months and got this thing to a stage where, weirdly, he was happy to submit it, but didn't actually like it very much himself. He said, and now it's all finished. Casse-Noisette is in all its ugliness done.
Well, one of the reasons that he ended up writing it relatively quickly is that he left it to the last minute. He really wasn't feeling inspired. And it seems like he really only got going when he went to the USA because he'd been invited to act as a conductor at the inauguration of Carnegie Hall. And then on the way home, he stopped in Paris where he encountered a new instrument. I love the days when you could just encounter new instruments. I want to say, are we saying Celesta or are we saying Celesta?
Okay, I would have just said Celeste.
Yeah,
well, I'm going to say Celeste.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Well, it looked
It's
like
a new instrument.
Yeah, it's a new instrument. Well,
As
as far as I'm concerned, it's still a new instrument. I don't know that it fully caught on, but it resembled a piano and it sounded a bit like a glockenspiel, and that's what he ended up using for the Sugar Plum Fairy.
So that's that kind of supernatural sound.
Yeah, it's like, plinky plonky. And I think that gave him a little bit of inspiration. He was like, well, at least I'm bringing something new. He had one brought to Russia because he didn't want any of his fellow composers noticing that there was this cool new instrument on the market.
Yes, he wrote, I'm afraid Rimsky, Korsakov and Glazunov might hear of it and make use of the new effect before I could.
Everyone's going to be writing about sugar plum fairies.
Yeah. Those were his big competitors. I mean, where are you now, Glazunov? No one's doing your ballet at the Met every year, are they?
Well, I think we have to get to the point of the episode being that it was on this day that it premiered and it was not well
Someone's got an eye on the format.
I just feel like we need to embrace it. I mean, actually, before we get into the reviews, Tchaikovsky himself had a kind of smirking pleasure over how poorly it went down, considering he didn't like it. He'd already written that it was infinitely worse than Sleeping Beauty. And I'm like, way to dunk on yourself. But then he wrote to a friend after the premiere on this day and said, apparently, the opera gave pleasure, but the ballet not really. And as a matter of fact, in spite of all the sumptuousness, it did turn out to be rather boring.
Yes, let's look at some of the reviews then. Here are some choice examples. In the first scene, the entire stage is filled with children who run about, blow their whistles, hop and jump, are naughty and interfere with the oldsters dancing. In large amounts, this is unbearable. Here's another. Neither the corpulent, podgy Sugar Plum Fairy nor her bearded partner who had put on weight could produce model fairy tale characters, and thereby did not contribute to the success of the performance.
That's a little personal.
I think so.
That one hits a little,
I feel
hard.
like Quentin Letts would find a euphemism for that, don't you? Corpulent feels too on it.
They did actually say positive things about Tchaikovsky's score. Some critics called it astonishingly rich in detailed inspiration, and from beginning to an end, some beautiful, melodious, original, and characteristic music. So, there was one thing they liked about it, which was his bit.
Marius Petipa was like, I gave such a good brief.
Yeah.
One person who was in the audience who did enjoy it was Tsar Alexander III. He loved it, as well he might, because Tchaikovsky was his favourite composer anyway. It got him to write stuff for a lot of his official events. And in an echo of his coronation feast, in the second act, there's this scene where people bring on different delicacies from around the world, which is quite baffling when you go to see it these days. Like, why is this happening?
This is a praline.
Yeah. But there's like Chinese tea and Arabian coffee and chocolate from Spain. The reason that was happening was for the sole audience of Tsar Alexander III to say, look, what a celebration of Russian trade routes we've incorporated into this fairy tale.
Oh, that's amazing.
So that's why he loved it.
Also, by the way, I think if you have to please one person in the audience,
Make it the Tsar.
Yeah.
Make it the
Yeah.
Tsar. If you have to please two people, make it the Tsar and the
critic.
chief critic.
Yeah. No one thought this was going to go on to be the show that would define not just his ballets, but ballet. Like, if you've never seen a ballet before and you're imagining ballet, I mean, okay, maybe you're imagining Swan Lake, so tick for him as well.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you're imagining this, aren't you? And if you've only ever seen one ballet, it's this. And if you've only ever been in one ballet, it's this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely wasn't an instant classic. A lot of people in the ballet world actually are not huge fans of the Nutcracker, or at least aren't fans of its all-consuming popularity.
Yeah,
which I
because
think is
it's like
fair.
Radiohead not wanting to perform Creep, though, isn't it? Like, it comes to a point where you have to acknowledge it is the one people want to see.
I'm just trying to impress the Tsar, you guys. I don't care what everyone else thinks.
Now,
This episode first aired last year exclusively to members of Club Retrospectors.
Join today and unlock a new episode this Sunday.
Patreon.com/retrospectors.